I look out in the audience, and the first thing I feel I need to do is to thank you. Thank you for giving me your time to come here and listen to me talk. I'm going to talk about the Haynesville and a little bit about me and the Haynesville. I worked it when I was at Marathon briefly in an unconventional group, early on when the play was just starting. Then I worked it again when I was at Southwestern Energy, kind of just as one of those retrospectives when the play was moribund. And then about the time I joined Goldman Sachs in 2017, the potential of Haynesville had been recognized, it had been rejuvenated, and so there was a lot of, our geoscience division that I was the head of, we were supporting the above ground transactions that were going on. So I've seen it several times, and then also last year I was the chair for the AAPG Playmaker Forum that focused on the rejuvenation of the Haynesville as well as several other Gulf Coast plays. So the talk I'm going to give you tonight is based a lot from the AAPG Playmaker Forum from last year, though I'm going to branch out a little bit because I like to be creative and I like to put things in a bigger perspective. So I'm going to talk about some of the non-technical implications of this play also. Okay, so the Haynesville has undergone this explosive renaissance. We've seen in the last 2.5 years, production is up 4 BCF a day, and it's up pretty close to its all-time peak that it had back in about 2012. Now this is remarkable growth for a play that people had pretty much decided was over, and more importantly, it occurred during a time, that growth occurred primarily during a time when natural gas prices were flat to falling. So obviously at the well level, we went from 230 rigs at the peak down to as few as 20 when the play was pretty much dead. But then we've increased the rig rate by about only 50, yet we're getting this tremendous surge in production. And of course that's related to the fact that the new wells are flowing twice as much gas as the old wells, and that's what the blue curve shows here. This is EIA data. But more importantly, the EUR for those wells is up 5-fold, which means that the wells are coming on and staying on strong, which is why you don't need to drill 200 wells here to maintain that large production profile. So this is the outline of my talk. Why is the Haynesville pretty much the premier methane play to be in, or the premier shale gas play to be in? Well, here's why. It's undergone this renaissance because of the new fracking that's been applied to it. I'll talk a lot about this, so no more. It also has ready access to markets. There's a growing LNG industry in Southwest Louisiana, and the Haynesville has straight pipelines into that LNG market for export out of the U.S. Southwestern Louisiana is going to see continued growth in their petrochemical industry, and there are companies that are now insourcing their jobs, insourcing their businesses back to the U.S., and they're doing this primarily because they know they have cheap and reliable natural gas. And so a good example of this would be, say, fertilizer. 78% of the cost of goods sold of fertilizer is just the natural gas. And knowing that you have that access, to, we're probably not going to see $14 an M prices ever again, but knowing you have that has allowed companies to move back here to the U.S. And that's a good thing. And then also power generation is, in the southeast is going to pull away another 2.5 BCF a day. So all this bodes well for at least there being a strong demand for natural gas here in the Gulf Coast. At the same time, and I don't mean to be disrespecting the Marcellus and the Utica, those are really the ginormous plays of the U.S., but they're limited because they sit on the far side of the Appalachians. There's pipeline issues, and there have been some fairly large gas deducts. Now, in recent time, the Marcellus players have tried to get additional pipelines built out of northern Pennsylvania, across New York State, and into the Boston market to get the people in Boston, where the winters are really cold, to get them more natural gas, to get them clean, burning, abundant natural gas. That hasn't worked out so well. The Constitution pipeline was blocked in August of 2017, and this was viewed as a victory, okay? So 2017 happened, and then early 2018 we had very cold weather in Boston, and so what happens? The people in Boston are freezing, and they need cheap, abundant gas. So we see these LNG tankers offloading at Mystic River, and this is gas from Siberia. So, you know, just from standing away from across the room, it seems like maybe a better source of natural gas for the people in Boston might be a little closer than Siberia. It might be, you know, the Marcellus. Okay, so let's have some fun. Let's talk about the geology. The yellow circle shows where the location of the subbeam uplift is and the Haynesville field that I'm going to talk about. This is a paleogeographic map. Out here is shale, going up dip, time equivalent. You get shallower water and you get into the Cotton Valley Lime or the Gilmer, then you get into the Buckner evaporites, then you get into the Haynesville classics, and all this progrades over the top of the Haynesville shale. This is a strat column. This is the Jurassic. Here's the Haynesville shale. It's Kimmeridgian in age. As you know, the Kimmeridgian is a great source rock interval around the planet. The Kimmeridge shale of the North Sea is the source rock. In Saudi Arabia, it's the Tequate Mountain and the Hanifa, which are late Jurassic in age. Also, what you find here in parts of the play is this younger Teuthonian Middle Bossier shale, which is also a target in the play, and I'll refer to that later. In terms of structure, here's the Texas-Louisiana state line. The depth ranges anywhere from 11,000 to 14,000 feet. In terms of porosity, this is from Core Lab's presentation. The best porosity defines the two sweet spots. There's one right here that's basically DeSoto and Caddo Parish, and there's another one down here along Angelina. I'm going to just throw a little bit of color animation on there to highlight these two areas for reference on future slides. So in terms of thermal maturity, this is just dry gas, almost completely dry gas. There's a slight wet component, so the BTU content is bumped up a little bit more. It's not all just methane, but overall you see that the thermal maturity, whether you're in the shallow Middle Bossier or the deeper Haynesville shale, it's 1.2 to 1.5 and even a little bit higher. But this is a dry gas play, and you can see where the sweet spots land on those thermal maturities. In terms of thickness, it ranges anywhere from 50 to 350, but for the most part, the two sweet spots, the thickness is about 150 to 250 feet thick. In terms of pressure, it is overpressured, and you can see here in this area, it's up to 10,000 psi, and then down here in the Shelby Trough, it's over 10,000 psi. And pressure, of course, in a gas play is your friend. It's the only drive mechanism we have. So just throw on the two area outlines there. This is a west to east cross section through the Haynesville, right here, and there's the Texas-Louisiana state line. And it may not be readily apparent, but there's a line right here that marks 15%. And the yellow is 15% porosity as measured on the electric logs. And what you see as you go from west to east is that yellow creeps out and starts touching that 15% porosity line, and that's a really good rock. And that's why this is the sweet spot. And of course, here's a scale bar for 200 feet, so that's a bit over 200 feet right there, and a bit over. From south to north, from the southern sweet spot up into the northern sweet spot, the most interesting thing, of course, is you still see good Haynesville down here. It's touching that 15% line, but now you also have that Bossier porosity, and by the time you get up to about well 3, it's starting to degrade and go away. So certainly, my opinion is the southern area is better than the northern area because you get two benches to work with. And the incremental difference in depth is not that big of a deal. Now, the folks at Core Lab have done a lot of work on the Haynesville, and Randy Miller showed a lot of maps at the Playmaker Forum. and they've showed, BCF per acre foot and all the other parameters that you might think of. But he showed this slide, which I like, because it's a very pragmatic slide. And that is, if you want to map the Haynesville, and if you want to know where to go, just look at the density log. So what is shown here from light to dark, from yellow to blue, is low density to high density. So this is low density in the Middle Bossier, and this is low density in the Middle Bossier, and in the Haynesville and the Middle Bossier. And this is where the sweet spots land. And the sweet spots are coincident with the low density. So, and I like that slide because it's an easy way, it's something I can relate to as a geologist. It gives me an easy way to map the plain. In terms of the rock properties, and again, this is from Randy Miller's presentation, or actually this is from Core Lab that Bob Turnham showed, the head of Goodrich. What you can see on this 12-well cross-section starts down south in the southern sweet spot and goes up into the northern, is that you see the TOCs can average anywhere from 1.5 to 4.5%. Quartz can be 25 to 35%, and calcite can be 10 to 25%. The clay fraction gets a little scary because we're at 25 to 35%, and you worry about ductility. And you always worry about clay and ductility. That 35% gets a little scary, but overall, we know the rocks break, so it's not a problem. Now, on a ternary diagram here, this is the same data presented a different way, but up here it's clay, this is the ductile, and this is the danger zone. Down here it's calcite and dolomite, over here is quartz, K-feldspar and plagiate clays. And shown here is the Haynesville and the Middle Bossier, and they sit comfortably within the brittle range. As far as porosity, this is GRI crushed rock protocol porosity, okay, not log measured porosity. What you see for the Haynesville is it can measure anywhere from 5 to almost 15%. And what you see for the Middle Bossier is it can be a little bit better, anywhere from about 7.5 up to 12%. This is a fairly good, it's got the pore volume there. In terms of permeability, Randy Miller says, in his opinion, he said at the Playmaker Forum that this is some of the best permeability, or the best permeability that he's seen in a shale play, where it's 1/1000th of a millidarcy for the Haynesville, and that's really remarkable, according to him. The Middle Bossier is not far behind. They're both effective, and we know this based on well performance. In terms of pore types, when we think about shale plays, a lot of times you think that it's all about the kerogen. It's all about kerogen-hosted porosity. The good news about the Haynesville is it's more than just that. Yes, there's kerogen there. There's TOC there. There's organic matter, and that's shown by this flat black matte color here. And there's a little bit more of it down there, and there's some of it here. And yes, you do see these kerogen-hosted pores, a really big one, and there's the classic sponginess there. But then there's also interparticle porosity, and that's a great thing, and some of it's pretty good. And there's also porosity within these pyrite framboids. There's a lot of porosity here that's between grains, and I suspect these are micrite grains, but some of these may also be clay grains. And I'm not smart enough to know the difference based on this thin section. I bet Steve or somebody here could tell me which one is which. Good for you. So I said I'd talk a lot more about fracking. The thing that set this play off really was Chesapeake. I know in my abstract I bragged on the independents making resource plays happen in America, but it was really Chesapeake. Give them credit. From what I've heard, the folks at Chesapeake were looking at their big data, and they realized that they were seeing incremental gains for more and more sand. So what Chesapeake decided to do was, instead of completing the next well instead of going up from 1,800 pounds to 2,000 pounds, they decided to just put away 2.5 tons per foot. So they didn't do a small incremental, they just made a huge jump. They put away 25,000 tons, 50 million pounds of sand in a 10,000 foot lateral. And this is what they called their Propageddon well, and they were rewarded handsomely for their results. Their cost per MCF went down 76%, and at the same time, their rate increased 70%. So this suddenly, and their EURs, they saw the stability in the well profile. They said, okay, this is a good thing. And it was shortly thereafter that I joined Goldman Sachs, and this was a pretty big play where people were consolidating lease positions and other people were selling out, and a lot of deals happened at that time. Here's a diagram, here's a table of the different parameters over time. I include this because this is being recorded and you'll have access to this, but I'm not going to read all this to you. The bottom line is longer laterals, shorter spacing, more stages, more clusters, more perfs, pump a lot more sand. And the bottom line is you see a large increase in the EURs, and the cost at $12.5 million, that's probably a cost that's not going to vary a lot even if we go back into a boom, because most of this cost is incremental. You know, in drilling, they can drill a horizontal 1,000 feet a day. So I don't foresee that there'll be a time if there's another boom where these prices will go up to $20 million a well. So there's been this sea change in how wells are fracked. And there's the old way and the new way, but what does this really mean? Well, the old way was kind of appealed to what, I don't know how many, whoever was around here, probably most everyone here. Remember 10 years ago when we all thought we were going to become completion engineers, and we took those classes with Halliburton on fracking and frack design, and we all learned about half length and wing height and all that stuff. Well, that's what those old fracks were in the Haynesville were designed to do, was to build that big wing. That was the big talk. Get the big wing and the half length and all that stuff. And most of that stuff, as a simple geologist, I just didn't understand, or I didn't want to understand. The goal now is just simply maximize the perm in the near wellbore environment by just turning it to rubble with as much sand as you can. Just kill it. Put 2.5 tons of sand per foot in there and just, open it up, prop it up, and make this rubbleized zone that has a tremendous surface area and volume that can drain a lot of gas into the wellbore. This has led to, I said this would improve the curves, so let me show you some curves. This is from Bob Turnham's presentation. This is what an old well would look like, and this is what Goodrich's second generation and third generations well look like. This is 3,000 pounds per foot, and this is 4,000 pounds per foot. And what makes this go is that just look at 10 months. Come up here at 10 months, the old wells would make 3.5 BCF. The Gen 2 wells are going to make 5.5, and the Gen 3 wells that Goodrich is drilling, they're going to make 7 BCF in the first 10 months, or so they report. And they've got the curve to prove it. And that means you're getting more money faster, and that makes the play very attractive. So I call this the up and to the left effect. And the important thing about this whole fracking revolution that we're seeing here in America is that this kind of improvement, this up and to the left effect, is not something you just see here in the Haynesville. Let's jump out to the Permian Basin and look at what they're doing in tight oil out there. It's the same story, Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3. By the time you get through it all, we don't need to memorize all this, but it's longer laterals, go to slick water, pump more sand per foot, and you see the same thing. You see that up and to the left effect where, Noble's Gen 4 well is probably going to produce 5 times what their Gen 1 well did in the first 100 days. It's going to produce 250,000 barrels of oil. And this is happening throughout our industry, which is part of the reason why we really do. This whole fracking revolution is a disruptive technology every bit as profound as Uber was to ride sharing, or Airbnb was to room rental, or Amazon was to retailing. We're in a sea change in our country because of technology and innovation. And this is being shown by this is borne out by the well economics. Again, I'm stealing from Turnham's presentation. The assumptions are for the economics are here. They do have a 24-month holiday, severance holiday in Louisiana, but on their 10,000-foot lateral type curve, and I think, this is the 25 BCF EUR, what you can see is the IRRs are fairly robust. I think now this morning it was 360 NM, so their IRRs are over 100%. whether you're looking at variations in EUR or whether you're looking at variations in CapEx, they're doing quite well. The most important thing though, again, there's always controversy about numbers, and I'm not trying to put a dig on anyone's numbers, but if these are true, then this is a very robust play, even when you get down to 250 and you fall short of your EUR target, or even if you get down to 250 an M and your cost of drilling the well goes up, you're still making a 24% rate of return. Not great, but you're not losing money. So far, what I've been talking about is what's been kind of the push, the supply increase from the Haynesville. Now I want to talk about the pull, and that is the demand increase, just very briefly. As I had said before, there's an additional about 8 million BCF a day that's going to be needed in southwest Louisiana for petrochemical and LNG. And the reason why people are getting into LNG in a big way is because LNG is becoming a global commodity. It's getting traded around the world, and this it's the very nature of how we deal with gas now. It's become an international market. You may fill up your tanker here in Louisiana and send it out, and you don't even know who the buyer is. Maybe you have a buyer in London one day, but he trades that to another buyer in France, who trades it to somebody else in Pakistan, who then trades it back, and this is now becoming a much more fluid market. According to Woodmac, the consultancy, they believe that the U.S. will be the top LNG exporter on the planet by 2040. Who would have thought this would have occurred in our lifetimes? Well, there's a lot of young faces in here, so I can't say that. But some of us older guys with some gray hair, we never thought we'd see this. And the real romance here, and this is what motivates the people to install this LNG. This scale's changed a little bit. This is in millions of ton per annum, but they see this additional demand of 127 million tons of new liquid LNG capacity required in just the next 6 years. And where's it going? Where's all this LNG going to? This is a city in China in the middle of the day, and that's what happens when you rely on coal-fired power and steel. And the leaders of China are sensitive to their people's needs. They know they want a better, a cleaner environment. They're going to be buying a lot of this LNG. And to be fair, because we're not anyone to point fingers at the Chinese, this is what our country looked like in 1946 in Donora, Pennsylvania, middle of the day also. So the Chinese are going to do the same thing for their country too, I believe. In terms of economics for LNG, I just want to touch on this just briefly, because this is what's going to make the Gulf Coast the natural resource. It's going to be the natural resource supplier to LNG. It's the fact the economics work, and I'm using Tellurian's data not because I own their stock, though I probably should, but because they have the full cycle. They own the molecules in the ground because they bought a lot of acreage in Louisiana. So they're drilling the wells, but they also have the liquefaction plants. So all in, drilling, operating, completion, transportation, contingency, liquefaction, full on board, FOB, their cost per MMBTU is $3. That's pretty good. More importantly is Gulf Coast netbacks. They've been as high as 15 and down to 9. I know the European TTF is a bit over $8 right now. Your shipping cost into Europe is $1 an M, so that's $3 plus 1.4, and you're selling that into an $8 market. That's a pretty good rate of return. Turning that around, if you're going to Asia, it's $1.50 shipping, and you're gonna sell that $4.50. Your $4.50 cost is going to go into a $10 to $12 an MMBTU market. There's profit there. But the investment in these LNG trains is enormous. So these things will be built out, but it's not going to happen overnight. Now, finally, I added this because I like to talk about bigger pictures, and I think this is something that we don't talk about enough. Fracking gets slammed a lot these days, and how often do we hear good news? How many people in this audience who were not at my SIPES talk last year know that last year in the U.S. led the world in reducing our carbon emissions. How many people know that? Yeah, okay. The news is finally getting out. Yeah, that's good. We reduced our carbon emissions by 44 million tons. And second was Ukraine. At the same time, China increased theirs by nearly 120 million tons. And if you don't like this data because it's from BP, you can get some pretty similar results from EIA, where they talk about 47 million metric tons reduction. Those are some pretty meaningful numbers. And there will be those that might argue that, well, these CO2 reductions are because, well, the economy got soft and, we weren't really growing. But that's not really true. Relative to the base, the 2005 base, this is the Federal Reserve data from St. Louis, the economy's grown 27%. And I use the 2005 base because that's the base for the Paris Accord. So it's not really a matter of, well, we had a recession. This is just part of a long-term trend. And that you see that our carbon emissions are down 12.5%, even when you include that last little bit of kick up that we saw here in 2018. The important point here is that our goal, our target for the Paris Accord was a reduction of 25% by 2025, and we're already halfway there. And I think we're going to get there because increasingly what you see, if you look at some of these online Sierra Week and such, the people in the power generation business understand that irrespective of whatever administration's in power, if you're going to retire an old coal-fired plant, you're not going to replace it with a new coal-fired plant. You're going to go to natural gas. And if you look at BP's report, the cost per kilowatt hour, coal versus natural gas, are about the same, but in fact, in some cases, natural gas beats out. I personally, despite my comments about the picture with the NRDC, I'm an environmentalist. I've seen what happens when you have lots of coal-fired power plants. This causes lots of acid rain, so I say, yahoo, yip, yip, yahoo. The point is that fracking is making America an energy leader. Fracking is making America energy independent. Fracking is making more jobs. It's employing people. It's bringing companies back. And most important of all, fracking is making your environment a cleaner place. Now, there'll be those that argue that, well, the U.S. is still a big leader in terms of per capita emissions. That's true, but this is data from the World Bank, not some right-wing blogger or Exxon. We've reduced our per capita emissions of CO2 by 13%, and we are now down to our 1964 levels. And that's as of 2014. It's only improved since then. So that was my soapbox there. Now, but there are a lot of benefits that we just don't hear about, and I think this is one of the reasons why people think of the oil industry as being like a dirty industry, and a lot of millennials don't want to go into oil and gas because, well, it just pollutes the environment. It's just bad all the way around, and that's really not really true. So America does have a secret for why we have fracking success, and this is a dangerous document that I'm going to release on this audience. It's called the Constitution of the United States. And I think this is part of why America is a center for entrepreneurialism and invention. It's because we have clear property ownership written into our Constitution. We have transparent banking laws. Individual rights are explicit, and the government's power is clearly limited. The Constitution really enshrines the freedom of the individual. And when this thing was first put out, it was considered the American experiment. The sovereigns and the upper classes and the aristocrats thought this was nuts, that we'd allow the rabble to rule themselves. And it turned out to be a pretty good experiment. But my favorite clause is Article 1, Section 8, which is the patent law clause, which means that this enshrined in America the ability, if you build a better mousetrap, you can profit from it. So, we all know about, how many times, I've used this prop several times, but one of my many props will be this thing right here. The guys that put this thing together, they didn't do this to make a fair, just, and equitable society or anything like that. They did it to make money. Jeff Bezos founded Amazon not to make the world a fair, just, and equitable society or anything else. He did it to make money. and he made a lot of money. And he's put people like Sears out of business. What's fair, just, and equitable about that? That's okay. I'm happy with that because life is about change. Nobody should have worried about the buggy whip makers when the automobile came along, and because they all stopped making buggy whips and started making upholstery for the cars. Evolution, a vibrant economy is about evolution, and it's about change, and it's always constant change and constant improvement, and a constant improvement in your quality of life. Here's another high-tech thing that somebody was able to patent long ago. In 1830, this is a paperclip. And that's part of what makes this country great. That's why we lead the world in innovations. It's because some guy in 1830 can come up with a better idea and patent it and make money on it. And that's the reason why you see so much innovation being nurtured here in America. And as a result of this, the world is now a better place for it. So to quickly summarize this, the reason why we have this fracking revolution, we have free market capitalism, we have banking transparency, we have private property rights, we have no government to approve, or no government committee where you have to go before to get your idea approved, and ultimately the Haynesville gas is representative of the entire American energy revolution. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, that's a good question. The question is about what causes the overpressuring. Overall, like a lot of these shale gas systems, they have so little permeability that they are self-sealing, okay, self-sourcing and self-sealing. So as you have the generation of hydrocarbons, you have the kerosene cracks oil, then it cracks the gas and its volume changes, and it has no way to get out. The other thing that I couldn't address here is that the overpressuring is also directly related to the number of horizontal fractures you see, and that's based on Core Lab's work. Beef, that was what they call it in the Vaca Muerta. But the overpressuring is really, the other reason for the overpressuring is because the whole of the subbeam uplift, you generate this pressure, and then you unroof it, and now you have that disequilibrium. That what may have been a 0.7 gradient, you take it up 2,000 or 3,000 feet, and now it's a 0.9. So a little bit of uplift helped also.
So that part's thermodynamic in addition to the intermittent field.
Yeah, I'm not smart enough to know quite exactly what thermodynamic would. Thank you very much. The question was, are there zones that are better than others? I would have to say that I believe the answer is yes. Unfortunately, I don't know. I can't give you the secret sauce. Yes, I think you raise a very good point, and I've recently saw a USGS report for the the Jurassic, for the whole of the Gulf Coast, and all upper Jurassic rocks, and that was a huge number. I think it was 2,000 TCF. Didn't really address the question you have, and so I believe I read somewhere it was 12 or 20 TCF. But
I'll get one more.
I think, that's a really good question, and that's like the 500-pound gorilla in the room. I know there are people smarter than me in the audience who are already applying that 4 wells per section is about your limit, and then you start seeing well interference. But there was a really good paper at the Playmaker Forum that addressed just that, the parent-child relationships, and when do you start seeing that interference. And to be honest, it's a good question. I know the answer, I just don't remember it. Okay. But if you give me your card, I'll share with you the reference on that. There's a really good paper at the Playmaker Forum. Yes, please.
Scott Tinker calls this the transition flag. Transition meaning maybe 40 years.
Yes.
But this isn't the ultimate answer.
I think you're right. I think that ultimately where we're going is, I don't think we're going to frack our way. We're going to have a fracking revolution forever either. And so ultimately, it's great that we have natural gas now. We'll ultimately have to migrate to something else. The good thing is we'll be able to start leaving coal first, certainly being able to leave coal behind and then oil, and then go to natural gas and then go to other things. It may be large-scale wind. It may be biomass. It may be harvesting the tides. I mean, if anybody's going to have a big thought on this, it's going to be Scott Tinker. That's for sure. But I agree with you. See this.
So, if you you've been following recently, there's growing concern about fugitive methane
Yes.
emissions, which is a much more dangerous greenhouse gas. So
Yes.
can you think of any market initiatives, free market initiatives, which are going to assist in the curtailing of fugitive methane emissions?
Yes. So my former employer, Southwestern Energy, was one of the companies that set up this this program that has a fancy acronym for it. I can't remember what it is. ECHO was there for water recycling. They have another one, and there's quite a number of companies that have joined this to pledge. Southwestern led the way on this to pledge we are going to drive methane emissions down to zero. Because you're right, methane is a much more dangerous CO2 greenhouse gas than CO2. I think it's 100 or 1,000 times more. So yeah, I know there are companies that, just like the coal company or the power companies, are realizing we need to get off coal. I think the smart thinking companies like Southwestern are realizing we need to get our methane emissions down to absolutely zero. And they have incentivized for that because methane is what they sell. So why would they want to lose 1% of their gross volume of sales?
Well, unfortunately, some people always say, well, yeah, I'm losing 2% methane here, but I'm doubling my profit on my well, so I would just kind of ignore that.
Yeah.
That 2%
Well,
loss of the doubling my profit.
and
So
this
that's
is-
why, how can we get a free market
Yeah.
incentive to limit methane emissions?
And it may be that you know, part of it is, it may, I'm not against all legislation. I mean, I think that either the companies do this voluntarily because they see it's good environmental stewardship, or we legislate them into doing it, but they will do it. And because, you know, I grew up in the Adirondacks, and I've seen the ravage of acid rain there from all the coal they burn in the Ohio Valley. The streams that I used to fish when I was a kid that were full of trout now don't have any fish in them at all. So, you know, I hear you, and I think, you know, it's great. You know, if they can't do it, then, you know, that's why we have the people have a right to bring a petition of grievances to the government, and that may be one. So, good point. Yeah.
Since you've done some whole portfolio numbers and stuff, do you have a feeling for the current recoveries versus the in place?
No, I don't. And I just, and if I did, I mean, and that's not a dodge. I would, if I don't have one, and if I did, I wouldn't believe it right now. Because I don't think we have enough information with these, you know, this new generation of fracking as to the question that was raised earlier about when do we see interference. I mean, if someone wants to talk about that, I'd gladly yield the floor. If someone wants to talk about interference and what they think the rate advantage is.
Okay, so I think we're finished, and I want to have you join me in thanking Bill. Let's see. He gets this token paperweight in the shape of Texas. It has turritella fossils in it somewhere in the hill country.